Now, of course, we don't know what Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns is just yet, but Arenanet are taking center stage tomorrow to tell us all about it. So today, I want to run through with you guys what exactly we should be looking out for, or mainly the top 10 things I want to know about Heart of Thorns that we should be looking out to know about Heart of Thorns, and to see exactly what's going to be happening with this game, Guild Wars 2, going forward. So let's get started with the most important question. Is it an expansion? And there's a lot of further questions that come off of this, but absolutely this should be the first thing that Arenanet even explained to us. You would have thought they'd be open about the idea of this being an expansion already if it was one. They already have a bit of a bizarre history with their handling of the way expansions work. They would not announce to us that such a thing even existed for a long time. We had quotes early on that they would consider expansions for this game, for this franchise, but they never gave us anything explicit. I've always believed they should have announced, if this really is an expansion, that it exists. So much of the community kicking off over the past 2 years has been specifically in the face of them not letting us know that was their plan for this game. If people knew that that was their plan, if people knew they were working on something in the background, we wouldn't have had a lot of the hostility we have had. However, I can also understand the notion that they wouldn't tell us this fact because they were scared players would leave en masse, and we would instead just have massive spikes of activity around expansion releases, and then otherwise very little activity, as many other MMOs suffer from. So this is the first thing I expect them to announce. It is Arenanet. They are constantly trying to reinvent the wheel. They may very well be doing something different in accordance with this expansion reveal, but I certainly believe whatever it is, whatever they choose to call it, is going to be some kind of boxed thing, something we'll spend a lump sum of money on, and get access to huge changes and updates to Guild Wars 2, new areas to explore, and so forth. Whether then they innovate further by having some weird thing by saying, hey, and the original box is free for new people coming into the franchise, or what, I don't know. Though the timely announcement of a 75% off expansion in Guild Wars 2 just costs $10 at the moment, would kind of fall in line with the idea that the game is going to be totally free in future, and you would just buy Heart of Thorns, get it all at once. As always, I think their primary fear is splitting the community too much, something the original game Guild Wars 1 suffered from greatly. Number 2. What is happening to the living world? So they never told us that they were working on an expansion. Instead, they chose to tell us, hey, look, you're going to keep getting these free updates that will progress the story. This is going to be the living world, and you get to experience changes to Tyria and live through them. And, you know, they set out this general idea that expansions were too static, and they didn't present this idea of a living, ever-changing landscape in an MMO as the living world could. So should this turn out to be an expansion or something very close to expansion, we all must wonder what will happen to the living world. In particular, we're going to be looking for elaboration on when the living world will pick back up. If the expansion picks the story up directly from the end of Season 2, are we going to be on a huge break waiting now? Is that necessarily a bad thing? Does this allow the devs to focus on other features, as I have openly speculated about before recently? Things like fractals, things like Super Adventure Box, or are they going to go totally dark and use the next 6 to 8 months, or however long it's going to be, to prepare a ton of living world stuff for us, and we'll have a much higher, more frequently updating living world when it finally does return? We'll have to see. A lot of this depends on exactly how long till the expansion drops, which of course is another of these big questions. So number 3, hardcore content. Question mark. Is it coming? This is what so many of us want. Most of the people looking into this news right now are returning players, or players that have never quite left and we're struggling, we're desperate for more content, something that caters to us, the veterans. We know that they focused very much over the previous 2 feature packs on existing players trying to get that early game experience and those core features of the game ironed out. Now we want content. We want hardcore content. Are they going to give it to us? There have been hints and suggestions that they're looking into it. One of the most prominent things, of course, was the collaborative developer initiative on the forums regarding the topic of raiding. raiding being a very traditional hardcore staple of MMO endgame that this franchise has never really dived into fully. Arenanet took a lot of feedback from the community on that, said that they had listened, and what has that resulted in? Perhaps some serious changes for Heart of Thorns. There's also the question then of legendaries. People want more prestige items to go for, not this sort of semi-prestige stuff and just generally expensive stuff that we see in the way of Black Lion skins, but real prestige stuff like legendary weapons. Are we going to get a new set of legendary weapons? Are we going to get totally new types of legendary gear? As again, Arenanet have discussed before, they've talked about the idea of having legendary back pieces or legendary trinkets, legendary armors. Are any of these things coming? Are we perhaps finally going to get capes in the franchise? Such a huge part of the original Guild Wars. Hasn't been a thing in Guild Wars 2. We know they were playing with it before launch. They promised that it would come at some point. Is Heart of Thorns finally when we get capes? And are capes the legendary back pieces? We'll have to see. We want more prestige things to go for, and not necessarily just giant gold sinks, but difficult content for us to complete and be rewarded for. Are we going to see extensions to the world boss idea they played with early last year and finally seem to have dropped when they released the Triple Trouble Worm? Do they believe they have enough of a community established to keep putting this content out there? I can only hope so. This is one of the most important things for me and many others. We're hoping they're going to deliver. Perhaps equally as important, especially considering what most of Guild Wars 2's community is, number 4, casual content. Now this is very important too, because so many of us are very casual players, because Guild Wars 2 is the champion of the casual MMO, the MMO that you can play and still have a life. You can have a full-time job and a family and still be able to log in every day and feel like you've accomplished something, get some kind of reward, because it is the champion of this space, because ultimately the way it's managed to carve itself away from all those other MMOs that are dying, losing numbers massively, is because of its mastery of the casual. Are they going to top that? Are they going to continue adding these features? There are still many features I see commonly requested in the community that I personally don't care about for so much, but could easily be added with HOT. We're talking fishing. Early on when the game was released, you will notice that there is no chefing or any foods or consumables, anything related to fish. They left this gap in the game so that at some point they could perhaps add this. Is this what we're going to see now? Housing. People are desperate for housing. World of Warcraft's finally started dabbling into housing and had amazing results. WildStar built so much of its game around the notion of housing, and whether it did well or not, it's something people desperately want. Guild Wars 2 has the infrastructure in place, it has the home instances. This is something that's disappointed many players since the game came out. Are we finally getting it? And along the same lines, what about guild halls? People will tell you, this is Guild Wars, why is there no GVG? Why are there no guild halls? Well, perhaps this is the time for them to add it. Dueling is another staple feature of many MMOs. Philosophy-wise, I believe Arenanet have always decided to not add it to the game, but perhaps that will change now. Dueling has always been highly requested. Even simple things, guys, like having new emotes. Another common complaint, another thing people want for Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 has less emotes than Guild Wars 1, and it's had plenty of time to update its arsenal. There are perhaps some other features far less likely, but things I will have my ear to the ground for. Things like notice boards, things like player questing. Guild Wars 2 is great for the casual players right now, but there are certainly a lot of other things we see in other MMOs this game could have too. And that leads me rather nicely on to number 5, PvP content. We just mentioned the idea of GVG. Are we finally getting this? The PvP side of the game competitively has not really taken off, but I would say a lot of the core features necessary are finally in place. We are just a few updates short, perhaps, of what that side of the game really needs. The introduction of proper ladders and leagues and seasons. Will we see with Heart of Thorns this become a regular thing? Will we see the results of the test season that they played through this recent Winter's Day? And what about other things that have been mentioned on their live streams, even up to a very long time ago? The possibility of new game types. Yes, we have Conquest, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. Maybe it doesn't have what it will take. Maybe it's some other game type Guild Wars 2 really needs. We've seen that the devs are playing around with some kind of Dota style, or at least objective base assault-ish kind of map. Is this finally going to be dropped in with Heart of Thorns? Are we going to get some news there? Are we going to see even some of these very radical ideas many have of making Heart of the Mist completely free to play, monetizing it through cosmetics? And this would be a huge bolster, in theory, to the player base size over there in competitive PvP. There's going to be some kind of an announcement with this side of the game. It's one of the 3 core pillars of the whole experience. And speaking of the 3 core pillars, the final one, number 6, world versus world. What are we seeing change about world versus world? World versus world I'm more disappointed about now than I am about either PvE or TPvP. World versus world, while it still does see activity, has slowly but surely been dying. And they've tried a few things over the past 2 years to revitalize it, but really there are core, big, sweeping mechanical changes we want to see to the way that PPT works in theory, or maps themselves work, that would bring many, many players back. Are we going to see the results of their Edge of the Mists tests? When they added Edge of the Mists to the game, a phenomenal map with some really great siege placement and interesting design for the way objectives can be assaulted, they said to us, look, we're going to see how this plays out in the Edge of the Mists, and this will affect regular world versus world. We're going to make changes. Is Heart of Thorns when these changes are finally going to happen? Is Edge of the Mists itself going to become more relevant somehow than just a pathetic amount of supply to the main game type? In addition, we've heard recently, again, the prospect of changing the way servers match up completely, instead having guild alliances versing one another instead. These are big changes. World versus world has to get some love. Are people who don't buy Heart of Thorns still going to be able to benefit from this, or are we going to be gated? I would hope not. They're going to have to answer to some of these things. Moving back over to the PvE side of things, I've got number 7. We're looking for information about the explorable regions of this expansion pack, or most specifically, how big is this thing? Are we expecting it to be the same size as Guild Wars 2? Is it just basically a whole Living World season dropped in at once? Is that going to be enough to make people happy? I don't think so. I want to see it big. I want to see the same amount of regions, or just shy of the same amount of regions that we had added to the continent of Tyria in the very first place. And where are we going indeed to? Surely we're not just heading west, deeper into the jungle, a couple of new maps, and they'll call it a day. Are these hints that they've been setting up to do with Ascension really suggesting we'll get to go to the Crystal Desert, to the Isles of Janthir to fight back against the Massart? How expansive is Heart of Thorns? Where are we going? This has to be covered. Number 8, story progression. So here I'm talking about everything from what exactly is going on in the story, what are we seeing in these trailers, are we going to see another trailer? Surely they're going to give us some kind of visual information about Heart of Thorns beyond the trailer we saw in-game. We're actually going to get to see some of these new regions. Are we going to get to see some of the characters that will be involved in this story? Will we get an explanation as to the fate of Zodja, Logan, Air, and Traherne? And other questions too, if this is going to be treated as, you know, another bulk sum of story dropped into the game, how are they dealing with that? Are we going back to a personal story kind of idea? Do we as the player get to make choices once again? Will we have branching decisions? Not so many branches as they put in at launch so that it feels completely invalid and stupid, but actual decisions that have weight and carry meaning and give us that true RPG feeling back. Are there going to be race-specific plots just like we saw with the original personal story? Is the order we chose for our character once again going to become important? Maybe they're killing off the Pact here just so that the orders can once again become these independent organizations and have meaning to the story again. Will we really be seeing a return to Ritlock as soon as the story comes back? Are our player characters going to be speaking again, something that hasn't existed in the living world? All of these questions and more entirely related to the story progression in Heart of Thorns. What are we dealing with? For number 9, I'm most interested in the idea of a new class. If this is some kind of a traditional expansion, we should be at least expecting a new class, right? That's what most MMOs would do. Now, Guild Wars 2 isn't most MMOs. You'll notice I've left from this list really the mention of a level cap increase, though I am curious as to whether they have any plans there. But a new class surely must be something they're going to add. And if so, what are we going to get? Are we going to get this mechanical niche in the game filled with a third heavy armor class? If so, how will it act? It's not fair for us to say, oh, this could be a ranged heavy armor class, because in Guild Wars 2, most classes are effective at most ranges, and they've always strived to hit that. So what is the mechanical niche he will fill? Will he be an attritive AoE-ish character? Will he be based more on conditions or raw power damage? Even beyond that, though, are we getting a totally different class? Ritlock has been mysteriously wearing this blindfold now. I don't believe it to be true, but perhaps are we getting a ritualist added to the game? The trailer featured footage of loads of characters using spears. Does this perhaps mean the return of the Paragon? The Paragon in Guild Wars 1 was a heavy armor class, or perhaps we'll get something totally new. Maybe more than one class in total. I'm sure they're going to tell us. And that leads me into number 10. Last of all, the idea of having a new race. Again, my personal speculation is we'll probably only get one, if any at all, but things are looking a little bleak on this front right now. My original speculation would always have been that the Tengu will become a playable race, but there has been no hinting as to any involvement from the Tengu whatsoever in the living world so far. So perhaps that's not on their plans. Are we finally going to get to enter the Dominion of Winds? If they do add a new race, how exactly will their personal story work? Will they only be able to participate in Heart of Thorns storyline things instead of being a part of the whole Zaitan arc we got at the original release of the game? Mechanically, there's going to be a lot of shoehorning that Arena now have to do, and maybe if they do reveal a new race, like the Tengu, like the Lagos, maybe one of the minor races, the Skrit, the Kodan, the Centaurs, if any of these things become available, then they'll have to tell us how exactly that slots into the already established game. So there you go, guys. That's what I am most specifically looking out for tomorrow. All of these things could come up. All of them are incredibly exciting to me. Let me know if I missed anything major. And as you can see, I think that they've got a lot of things they can discuss in their 1.5 hour time slot. Even just the slightest little teasers to some of these topics will probably send us off into a frenzy. Anyway, I hope you guys are excited about tomorrow. If you missed the announcement, I will be on the official Guild Wars 2 stream with Matt Visual, doing instant speculation about what they reveal the second this 1.5 hour panel ends. If you're there as well, we've got tons of gems to give away, all kinds of good stuff. It's going to be amazing, guys. So that's tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know how pumped you are, and we'll see you next time.